The story of Dr. Samuel Okoro did not begin in a hospital. It began in the dust of a forgotten village, where children coughed through nights of fever and mothers wept over bodies they could not afford to bury. Samuel grew up barefoot, the son of a washerwoman and a man who labored in the sugarcane fields. His earliest memory was not of toys or laughter, but of humiliation. At school, his uniform was patched, his shoes mismatched, and other children mocked him. "Doctor? You'll never be more than a field hand," they jeered when he dared to say his dream aloud. Even some teachers smirked, shaking their heads. Medicine is for the rich, Samuel. Be realistic. But Samuel carried that humiliation like fire in his chest. While others laughed, he stayed awake at night, memorizing borrowed books by candlelight. He swore that one day he would stand in a white coat and heal the very people who were told they didn't deserve saving. Years later, when he finally entered medical school, humiliation followed him like a shadow. Wealthy classmates whispered when he arrived in the lecture halls with second-hand clothes. Professors looked at him as if he didn't belong. Once, in front of an entire auditorium, a professor barked, "Mr. Okoro, do you even know what a stethoscope is? Or are you just here to waste everyone's time?" The students roared with laughter. Samuel's face burned, but instead of walking out, he answered calmly, "I know what a stethoscope is, sir. And one day, I'll use it to heal those no one else will touch." The professor scoffed. "We'll see." Medical school broke many men richer than Samuel, but it could not break him. He studied through hunger, fainted once during an exam from exhaustion, and still dragged himself up to keep going. When he graduated, there was no applause, no celebration. His classmates went on to lucrative private practices. Samuel returned to the slums where he had grown up. There, he found tragedy waiting. Dozens of children were dying every week from treatable illnesses. Mothers begged at hospital doors, but were turned away because they couldn't pay. Men lost limbs to infections that could have been stopped with simple surgery. Samuel felt his chest tighten with rage. The humiliation of his childhood, the cruel laughter in lecture halls, the cold stares of the privileged, all of it returned, but now it had a purpose. He decided he would open a small clinic. No fees, no conditions. Whoever came through his doors would be treated with dignity, whether they carried a gold ring or nothing at all. At first, people didn't believe him. Some mocked him, just as they had when he was a boy. "What kind of doctor works for free?" sneered a local official. "He must be a fraud." Even his neighbors doubted. "Be careful," they whispered. "Maybe he'll experiment on you." But Samuel ignored them. He sold his few possessions to buy medical supplies, borrowed instruments from retired doctors, and set up a makeshift clinic in a crumbling building with leaking walls. The first patient was an old woman with cataracts who had been blind for years. Samuel operated with trembling hands, using the simplest tools, while rain dripped through the ceiling. Hours later, when she opened her eyes and wept, "I can see you," Samuel realized this was the beginning of something bigger than himself. Word spread. Soon, lines stretched outside his clinic, men, women, and children who had lost all hope. Samuel operated by day and night, sometimes eating only once in 24 hours. The wealthy mocked him still. "Let him waste his time," they said. "He'll burn out." But Samuel's fire only grew stronger. By the end of the first year, he had performed over 200 surgeries, all free. By the end of 5 years, the number passed 1,000, and every operation carried with it the memory of his own humiliation, transformed into an act of defiance. He was no longer the boy mocked for dreaming. He was the doctor the world said would never exist. But with every victory, darker forces began to take notice. Hospitals hated him for exposing their greed. Officials whispered that he was making them look bad, and enemies were preparing to remind him that humiliation never truly disappears. It only waits for its moment to return. By the time Dr. Samuel Okoro had crossed a milestone of 1,000 surgeries, he was both a legend and a target. In the poorest neighborhoods, mothers whispered his name like a prayer. Fathers brought their sick children and begged, "Please, doctor, save them. We cannot pay." And Samuel always answered, "You don't need to pay. Just trust me." But outside those crumbling walls, the powerful seethed. Private hospitals lost patients. Their waiting rooms grew empty, while Samuel's clinic overflowed. Surgeons who demanded fortunes for procedures began to look greedy compared to a man in a tattered coat who charged nothing. One hospital director spat in frustration. "He makes us look like monsters." A charity doctor in a shack? "He is dangerous." Soon, the whispers turned into attacks. It started with ridicule. Newspapers wrote sneering articles. Street doctor pretend to be surgeon. Officials mocked him at public events. At a medical conference, one wealthy surgeon stood and jeered. "Dr. Okoro, how many lives have you risked before you realize charity is no substitute for professionalism?" Laughter rippled through the hall. Samuel stood there, heart pounding with humiliation. He remembered being that barefoot boy, mocked for daring to dream. For a moment, he wanted to walk out. But then he thought of the blind grandmother who had seen her grandchildren again, the boy whose leg he had saved from amputation, the girl who could now breathe without pain. He lifted his chin and replied, "If compassion is a crime, then I am guilty. But let the lives I save be my defense." The laughter died into silence. Still, the humiliation burned inside him like fire. Next came sabotage. Inspectors suddenly arrived at his clinic, demanding documents and permits no one had ever asked for before. They shut down his electricity, seized supplies, and threatened to arrest him. One official sneered, "Maybe if you stop these free surgeries, we'll look the other way." Samuel's fists clenched. He had no bribes to offer, no powerful allies. All he had was his conviction. "I will not stop," he said quietly. That night, with no electricity, Samuel operated by candlelight. His hands shook from fatigue. His stomach ached with hunger, but he refused to let fear win. The villagers gathered outside, holding torches to keep the clinic lit. An old man whispered, "They humiliate him, but he fights for us. He is our doctor." But the attacks grew worse. One evening, as Samuel walked home, men cornered him in an alley. Their faces were hidden, their voices cruel. "You're making enemies, doctor. Stop embarrassing the hospitals, or you'll regret it." They shoved him into the mud. He rose slowly, suit torn, blood dripping from his lip. People passing by stared but did nothing, too afraid to help. Samuel walked home that night humiliated, aching, covered in dirt. But in his chest, the humiliation hardened into steel. The next morning, he returned to the clinic with his coat washed and his chin held high. Patients gasped at his bruises, but he only said, "Don't worry. I'm here. Let's begin." Yet his greatest test came not from enemies, but from exhaustion. Years of endless surgeries had left his body frail. His hands trembled sometimes. He fainted in the middle of one procedure, collapsing against the operating table. The family panicked. "Doctor, doctor." When Samuel awoke, shame consumed him. He had always been the strong one, the fighter. Now he was too weak even to stand. Some whispered, "Maybe you should stop. He is only one man." But Samuel refused. "If my body breaks, so be it. But until my last breath, I will serve." One stormy night, a poor farmer carried his daughter into the clinic. She was barely breathing. The family begged through tears, "Please, doctor, save her. We have nothing to give you." Samuel's body screamed with fatigue. His vision blurred. But he steadied his trembling hands and began the surgery. The storm raged, rain dripping to the ceiling, candles flickering against the dark. Hours passed. Sweat poured down his face. His knees buckled, but he refused to stop. Finally, the girl gasped and breathed. Her chest rose steady and strong. The father collapsed at Samuel's feet, sobbing. "You saved her life," he whispered. "You saved my heart." Samuel smiled faintly, though tears blurred his own vision. In that moment, every humiliation, every shove into mud, every mocking laugh was worth it. But as he leaned against the table, exhausted, he knew something terrifying. The battle was only beginning. His enemies had not yet unleashed their full fury, and the cost of defiance would soon demand more than sleepless nights. It might demand his life. The more Dr. Samuel Okoro healed, the more enemies he gathered. By now, he had performed thousands of free surgeries, and his name had spread far beyond the slums. People traveled from distant villages, walking barefoot for days, because they believed in one thing. If Samuel touched them, they had a chance to live. But with fame came fury. The private hospitals, the officials, even some politicians conspired against him. They claimed he was dangerous, unqualified, even criminal. One night, Samuel returned to his clinic to find the windows shattered, supplies stolen, walls smeared with red paint spelling one word: stop. The villagers gasped in horror. Mothers wept. Fathers begged him, "Please, doctor, leave. They will kill you." Samuel looked at the destruction, fists trembling, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal, the endless mockery from the wealthy, the bruises on his body from past beatings. All of it pressed down on him. For the first time in years, he wondered if the world was right. Maybe compassion really was foolish. Maybe humiliation was the only reward for kindness. The next day, officials arrived with soldiers. They stormed into the clinic, tearing down shelves, seizing his equipment. Samuel tried to intervene, but a soldier shoved him to the ground. In front of his patients, children, mothers, the elderly, he lay there in the dirt, his white coat stained. A voice sneered, "This is what happens when you pretend to be a hero." The crowd erupted in protest, shouting, "Leave him. He saved us." But the soldiers laughed. Humiliation burned Samuel's soul deeper than any wound. Lying there, broken and powerless, he thought of walking away. He thought of leaving the village to rot, just as the powerful wanted. But then he heard a child's voice, trembling but strong. "Don't stop, doctor. Please. You're the only one who cares." Samuel lifted his head. Tears blurred his vision, but his heart blazed. He stood slowly, battered but unbowed, and declared, "You can take my tools, my walls, even my life, but you cannot take my duty. As long as I breathe, I will heal." The soldiers froze. The villagers roared with courage. That night, the people rebuilt the clinic with their bare hands, carrying wood candles and scraps of cloth. Samuel realized he was no longer alone. The humiliation meant to destroy him had united an entire people. Soon, Samuel's fight reached the world's ears. International journalists began writing about the doctor who operates for free. Pictures of him working by candlelight spread across the globe. Donations poured in. Volunteers arrived. And suddenly, the same leaders who mocked him were forced to stand beside him for photographs, pretending they had always supported him. The irony was bitter, but Samuel no longer cared for their approval. He cared only for the faces of those he saved. Years passed, and Samuel's name became a legend. He performed more than 1,000 surgeries, each one a rebellion against humiliation, each one a declaration that dignity belongs even to the poorest. But he never forgot where he came from. At the opening of a new hospital built in his honor, Samuel stood before a crowd of thousands. Cameras flashed. Reporters shoved microphones toward him. Leaders praised him as if they had never tried to silence him. When it was his turn to speak, Samuel paused. He looked out at the sea of faces, some rich, some poor, all waiting for his words. He thought of the barefoot boy mocked for dreaming, the hungry student humiliated in lecture halls, the doctor shoved into mud by soldiers. And he said, "I was humiliated. I was laughed at. I was beaten. But humiliation did not kill me. It made me stronger. Every insult, every shove, every tear pushed me closer to my purpose. I did not heal to prove them wrong. I healed to prove that every life, no matter how poor, matters." The crowd erupted in applause. Mothers lifted their children high. Fathers wept openly. And Samuel, standing there in his worn white coat, finally felt the weight of humiliation lift from his shoulders. He had not only healed bodies, he had healed hope itself. That night, alone in his small room, Samuel wrote in his journal, "They tried to bury me in humiliation, but they forgot humiliation is just another kind of soil. And in that soil, I grew into a tree that will shelter generations." And with that, Dr. Samuel Okoro closed his eyes, not in defeat, but in triumph.